Welcome to Missions Life, where we share resources and encouragement for current missionaries, future missionaries, and those praying for missionaries. Missions can be hard, and we want to help you face the challenges of life, leadership, and ministry. We want your life to bear fruit for the gospel wherever you are. I'm Kyle Ferran, here with my co-host and wife, Heather. Welcome to the Missions Life podcast. Today on the podcast, we have with us Ruth E, a second-generation third culture kid, or a TCK, and a mother of 3 now adult TCKs. She's a co-author of Third Culture Kids, Growing Up Among Worlds, and the authors of Letters Never Sent, among other writings. She's a co-founder of Families in Global Transitions from 2019. She received an honorary literary doctorate from Wheaton College for her life's work. Ruth now lives in Indianapolis, Indiana with her husband, David, and remains actively involved in mentoring and supporting global mobile families in the ever-changing global landscape. So Ruth, welcome to the Missions Life podcast. It's a real joy to have you with us today.
Thanks. It's a joy to be here. I'm always glad when people care about this topic because I believe in normalizing it so that we can do it well in the sense of using the gifts we have and even growing from the challenges. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Very good. Well, I know even for myself, growing up as an MK, I think I read your book as I was going through my master's degree, and it was a lot of light bulbs going on. Like, oh, that's why I do what I do, and that was in my mid-30s. So that was even insightful as an adult MK, realizing the reasons behind why I did what I did. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, I think your book is sometimes referred to as like the MK manual. Parents, jokingly mention it that way, and we all know what they're talking about. But this is a conversation that when we travel around and visit missionaries and talk to families, in their living room or while we're doing dishes in the kitchen, there's constantly questions asked about raising MKs, raising kids that are living in different cultures and experiencing transition a lot. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And I just kind of want to jump in and ask, could you define the term third culture kid for us so that everyone knows kind of what we're talking about through this podcast?
I will in 1 minute. I want to say first, if God's called you, then it's not a mistake that your kids are MKs. But that's the question of how then do we do it well? How do we, it's not a mistake, but then I think God gives us opportunities to really help them thrive. TCKs is a name for third culture kids. And I guess the simplest way that I would define it now as the world is changing is that it's somebody who in their developmental years, I would just count those the first 18, even though we continue developing. But in these critical years where we're learning our identity, where we belong, our faith, our values, all these things about who makes us us, is when these children are growing up among many cultural worlds. And so they're growing up outside at least one parent's culture. Sometimes that becomes a part of the discussion now. Does it have to be both? But, the world is changing. But I would say it's somebody who spends a significant part of their developmental years living outside at least one parent's culture in a cross-cultural and highly mobile lifestyle with a lot of transience. In other words, you didn't go to immigrate. The kids who grow up in this, that we would call TCKs, have usually gone with a parent because of a career and it's a limited time. So when you go, even though I grew up for 12 years in Nigeria, I knew the day would come I would go home, quote unquote home. So you haven't come to settle. And so that's part of the story, is that also parents are raising their kids with the expectation that one day they will, quote unquote, repatriate. And so that makes it different than an immigrant experience where you go to settle and the whole job is to become assimilated in a sense. And so that's, of course, who missionary kids are, but it's also who military kids, diplomatic kids, corporate kids are too. We do belong to a larger group than we often remember that we belong to. Does that help?
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things you described the TCK says is growing up among worlds. And what would be some of the biggest advantages that gives them, and maybe what are some of the hidden cost parents might not be expecting?
For me, the advantage, and I would imagine for you too, Kyle, is the world is really big. And I got to see it. I got to see people from all kinds of cultures, and I got to see people from, I got to experience their food. I got to, you go to different people's homes and you have completely different foods, and that's all really interesting. As a Christian, I always felt that my biggest advantage was seeing that the Church of Jesus Christ was more than my culture,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that the people that we met and interacted with, that baseline of what we share, was always important to me. It's always been important to me. So that was to me the biggest gift on a personal level. I think for most TCKs in general, it is that you get to travel, you see the world, you start to understand there's different ways you can look at things. That can also be a challenge because you could come back and be a little annoyed if people haven't experienced that. And you think, well, why are you so set in your ways or whatever? And I had to realize at some point that I have a worldview that was developed in this context of growing up among worlds, where I really enjoyed that, and other people don't have that context, and so I can forgive them for theirs, just like they probably don't understand mine, but I maybe have to try and understand them a bit. But sometimes that's also, may I say, a problem in missions. When I went back as a missionary, I found myself quite annoyed, if I may say, with some other missionaries because they didn't see the world the way I did. And when I grew up, all my MK friends saw the world the way I did because we were all MKs. We were all doing this experience. We all knew what it was. And I had to realize when I went back as an adult that all my peers had not had the same experience. And that's not meaning that I had a better one. I had to figure out, wait a minute, they're not like when I grew up that all my peers were the same. So I think sometimes in missions that can even be a challenge when MKs go back and are with people who didn't grow up that way. And so that's just a sidebar for you in missions out there. But I know one mission that wouldn't ever let an MK go back to the place they grew up
Mm.
because they said, they always cause trouble. And after I understood, that I think that that's a great loss because that kid probably already knew the language and could really relate. But, we do develop a different way of looking at the world. And so we need to understand that about ourselves so that we're not so impatient with other people, just like, you have to understand any culture. And that's a gift to me, but it's also been a challenge for how I look
Mm.
at other people sometimes.
Yeah.
How do you see this maybe play out between parents who are missionaries but did not grow up as an MK, and they're trying to raise an MK on in a global space? Uh, can there be tension there or conflict, or what can we be noticing as parents that are like I'm monoculture, like I did not grow up with an MK experience, so now I'm trying to, as a missionary, raise MKs. Does that create conflict ever?
Well, I think sometimes the conflict is that the person like you who didn't grow up overseas or cross culturally is changed by the experience, no question. And they assume that that's the same change as their child is experiencing. But the difference is that when you grew up, my mother grew up in one place in Chicago. She died at 97. She still, if you asked her where she's from Chicago. That's where she's from. And if you ask her identity, she's an American. There's no question. And she said to me once, until you started doing all this crazy stuff, I thought you were from Chicago too. I said, Mom,
Mm.
where did I grow up? I grew up in Nigeria. I didn't exactly grow up down the street from all the people you know. So for the parent who feels like this is my culture, this is my identity, it should be my child's, parents can get annoyed that that kid is not embracing the same sense of identity and loyalty to the family. And so I think parents need to understand that once your child is growing up among many different worlds, they can have conflict or they can have divided loyalties in a certain sense because, I really want to cheer for Nigeria, but I can also be, you know, upset in some ways for it. But I think the parent has to understand the whole issue of how do you form identity. And that's one of the things that we're trying to help understand even more, that we receive identity from our culture, from the community, from our family, from the place. And every time you change those, the child has to start relearning it. So that's where you can have delayed adolescence in a sense, because the child, it's not they can't learn, but you have to keep starting over. How do I act in this place? What are the rules? I know how to act very well in Nigeria, in my mission subculture, in that context, in my third culture environment. But when I came back to the States, I didn't know who Elvis was. I just didn't know how to function. I didn't know how to swim. I didn't know how to do the social things my groups did because we hadn't done those. And so that's where the shame comes in. And I think parents just need to understand it's a different process and to encourage their kids. But also, your kid is still a kid. And the first thing they need is your love, your acceptance, and
Mhm.
all those good things. But it's not
Yeah.
the same experience as you had.
For sure. You kind of touched on those, all the times that kids have to make transitions and then kind of readapt to a new area and figure out new social norms and a new identity. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the long-term challenges that creates?
Yes. For me, um, who thought I had a great childhood, and I had a great childhood. I loved Nigeria. When I was in the States, I stayed with my grandma. I got to keep my friends. So if you asked me, I would say I had this perfect life in a sense. But I had sort of an undercurrent of depression that I couldn't understand. And I could sort of flash anger easily, at my kids or stuff, which of course then I would feel terrible for. So when I was 39, I just couldn't understand why, no matter where I went and thinking I would change if I just changed my environment, these things hung on to me. So that's when I started journaling what became Letters Never Sent. And I never understood how much grief I had.
Mm.
And the grief is because of what I loved. If I hadn't loved Nigeria, I wouldn't have felt the grief.
Mm.
So I started to journal, and I was shocked at the tears that came at 39. And I started my first letter writing my parents. Our daughter was going to leave us for a few months, and that precipitated it. So I thought, well, I left at 6 to go to boarding school.
Mm.
So I started with my first letter to my parents. And all of a sudden, I was that child. I could feel everything about that child, but I was also the adult who could write what the child was feeling. So I wasn't writing a book when I did it, but that's how I processed. And I got to when I was going to leave Nigeria, and I put it away for, I thought, oh, this is stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, I finally went back. And the minute I started to write, I realized that's the day I lost my world.
Mm.
That's how deep the loss was. But of course, I'm going to go back to America. I'm going to see my grandma. There's all these wonderful things. I've always known I'm an American, right? One day I will be leaving. But in that one airplane ride, I lost every tree I climbed. I lost every smell of market. I lost all my friends from Nigeria because they weren't going with me. And it's like the world died, but I was still alive. So how do you process that? And you're 13 and you take a quick airplane ride and you're on the other side. So there you go. And then when I um, was going to write about my parents leaving for 4 years, because I didn't see them for 4 years, until I was 39, I didn't realize that was the day my family died,
Mm.
because we were never 6 kids and 2 parents living together. So what happens is all of these changes, these mobilities, we're losing our worlds, we're losing relationships, we're losing things. But first off, it's for a really good cause. And certainly I wanted to be faithful. to God. I understood why. I didn't blame my parents. But God made us to be relational people. So every time the relationship's broken, there's a grief. And eventually they pile up. And then that's why so often they're unresolved. But they're also unresolved because a lot of times we don't give permission for the grief. And that was the thing when I started to write. I got a letter from Dave Pollock, who was working on the profile, and he was the guy that eventually, did the work with. But he sent me a letter from a therapist who was working with MKs, and he said, "What is it that you see the most?" And she said, "They lack comfort, and they lack a sense of personhood, what it means to be made in the image of God." And those are the two key things parents need to understand and work on. So when I saw the word comfort, I just started crying again. And I thought I was encouraged to death, but I was not comforted because everybody tried to make me feel better. Oh, I'm at boarding school. I miss my mommy. Instead of somebody picking me up and saying, "Oh, it's okay to miss your mommy," which they're trying to help me. I know that. They think they're going to make it work if they do that. Well, we're going to go swimming tomorrow. Just think about all the fun we're going to have. Think about all the kids who don't even have a mommy. At least you have a mommy. And so everybody's trying to help, but nobody says it's normal to miss a mommy if you're 6 and she's not there. So I think that we're not very good. And yet when I got that word, do you know how many times it's in the Bible? Comfort you, my people. Give the comfort to somebody else that you've gotten yourself. But we're terrible at it in missions, at least in my generation. It was, well, God's asked us, let's be soldiers. So that's one huge thing with parents is to understand it's hard and comfort your child. They're going to get through it, but they'll get through it a lot faster if they have that chance to say this is hard. And if you give permission. But I want to say to parents, it's hard for you too. One reason we don't comfort each other is because if I comfort you, I have to enter into your pain. And when we were leaving Liberia, we raised our kids in Liberia. I almost died with leaving myself. I knew God had asked it, but it wasn't what I expected. I had gone to Africa to die. I love Africa. And I saw my kids, and yet it was absolutely clear. I know exactly where I was when. So we got on we went out to the airplane to leave, and my daughter would not put her seatbelt on. And she was crying and crying. And I had just started processing my own stuff, so I wanted to tell her, just stop crying. But I thought, okay, can't do that. So I said, well, you have to put your seatbelt on, but you can keep crying. So she did. She cried all the way through Europe. I thought, oh, man, I've just ruined her life. But eventually she stopped crying. And about a year later, we were in the States, and she said, I really miss Liberia, Mom. And I just want to say, but you're doing so well. That's my usual. That's the way, the easy. And then I said, well, how do you feel about being here? And she said, well, I really miss it there, but I really like it here. And I thought, can you do both? So this year, after 40 years, she went back, and her husband took a picture of her taking her seatbelt off. So she finally got to do that. But anyway, I think that's the biggest thing for parents is don't push them through the grief. Have some faith that they will make it. And then we'll talk about personhood later. But anyway, that to me is the hugest thing is understand that you have grief and you can even cry with them. And that's okay.
When we were leaving South Africa, I think the thing that God really encouraged me with through that time was that we weren't uprooting our family. We were teaching them where our true roots were. And we had some difficult conversations and lots of tears. But that allowed us to have those real conversations about, hey, this is hard. But where can we find our peace and our joy through this time? And still grieve the loss, but hold on to Christ through those times as well. So
it's hard because you want your kids to not be sad. Be happy.
Absolutely.
And there's this urge as a mom to just fix it and get the smiles back on the faces. And, it's a real battle to watch your child grieve and to
Hmm.
let them. And then it's even harder, I think, to show our own grief because that fear of upsetting our kid or making their grief even worse. So I completely hear all the challenges that you're throwing out there. We've battled those own things in our hearts, but I'm glad you're putting words to it because it's really something that we need to talk about more frequently and provide the right language for parents to be able to help their kids talk through these things and keep it in a godly perspective. So thank
Can
you.
I tell you one more story about that?
Oh,
I
yes.
know I'm not on your questions, but the thing that changed my life in terms of the capacity to look at that before I did the journaling, that probably gave me the permission to do the journaling, was when we were in Liberia our first year. My uncle was another missionary there, and he was in a motorcycle accident. And my cousin was on the motorcycle with him, and he was really smashed to smithereens. And, he
Mm,
was in the next room, and I didn't know how to pray because I couldn't believe he was going to make it.
mm,
And my my shame or something was, if I don't pray with faith, then it'll be my fault that he dies because, you're supposed to pray with faith. And somehow at that moment, Jesus took me to the Garden of Gethsemane and I saw him weeping. And he says, Ruth, I know what it is not to want the Father's will. Sometimes the Father's will is very painful. Because of that, I'm not going to push you through this. I'm going to carry you. But of course, after he spoke to the Father and discussed his pain and said, is there any other way you could do this? Then we have the wonderful nevertheless. And at his greatest faith, he had his greatest pain. And his greatest pain, he had his greatest faith. And those two were not mutually exclusive. And that changed my life because I didn't have to decide were my parents right or wrong, was, to send me to boarding school, was all that. But the fact is that when we have loss, we have grief. And Jesus had grief. He had grief to the point of sweating blood. On the other hand, like you said, there was a greater reality that he followed. And so the issue of paradox to me was life changing, that you can have
mm,
both together instead of either or.
absolutely, yeah.
Are there any other ways that you encourage parents to help their kids process that grief as they're processing goodbyes and things like that?
Well, of course, this is where Dave Pollock's iconic raft comes in. That instead of sort of skipping over the reality of saying goodbye, we need to face it and do it fully. Because when somebody dies, we have funerals. And really, the raft is the funeral, where if there's anything that needs to be reconciled, especially if we understand that a lot of times when we know we're going to leave, we start creating conflict, sort
Mm,
of like so that, okay, it won't matter when I leave. So making sure that as best you can, you resolve that as an adult, but also as your kid. There's been maybe somebody who's a bully, or maybe they bullied, your kids even bully sometimes. And, are there relationships that need to be set right? But then affirmation, who do you want to thank? The Bible's filled with giving thanks. And so affirmation, who are the people you want to say, when I was here, you've been really important to me. And do that as a parent as well. So, it can be notes to other kids, it can be something to a teacher, but it's not just those people. Who are the people that have worked in your home, or the people that sell them the donuts down the street or something? And so then saying farewell, that's another part of the affirmation is, I mean, you can do it in sense together, you've been so wonderful, but really consciously saying goodbye. And Dave Pollock always said it was to people. We do that, we think about that, but to places
mm,
and taking pictures. Places are so important in ways we don't know until later when you smell that thing, or you just in that moment, you're back there. And so giving the child a way to say goodbye. Sometimes kids take pebbles, or they take a little bit of sand from the beach. I mean, I've seen all kinds of things. They can't take a full suitcase of rocks, but they can take something. Or people plant a tree. I was When I was in my house here, somebody came to the yard one day, and I said, "Do you need something?" He said, "Well, I grew up here. I just wanted to show my son where I grew up." And I said, "Do you want to show him inside?" And he said, "Yes." And then he said, "Could I go up to the room in the corner?" And he put his hand there and pulled out a tape that they had put all their names on, one of those mystic tapes or whatever you call them. And they had said goodbye to their house by putting a secret message someplace. And here, all these years later, he came back and he got it. So people plant trees. There's something that honors the place, if that's, and then to your pets. And then, making sure that if they're not going to go with you, that they are properly cared for. But possessions, I think a lot of times we think, oh, something's not that important. But for the kid, it's important. And the daughter who wouldn't put her seatbelt on wanted me to bring home all the little sundresses I'd made for her. Well, she's never going to wear them again, But somehow that connected her to Liberia. And so asking your child, what are the things? The other thing that is letting your child pack a box. Maybe that'll be the first one they'll unpack in the next place. But I think, so saying goodbye well, but then you get to the transition time. And that's often the hardest, both for you as a parent, because you're kind of in between, you haven't settled yet. You've said goodbye, but you haven't settled. And you wonder if it's the worst mistake you ever made, or, and your kids are sure it is. Absolutely sure it is. And so that becomes an even harder time. And that's the time, at least I think sometimes, to sit down and say, well, what did we lose? At least for me, I'll journal now and say, okay, what was my hidden loss? Because that was the thing I never knew, what I had actually lost. And so what did I lose? And, so I think those are things. But the other thing, if I can say this, for parents, what are your family traditions? Every family, that's the one thing that goes. So what are those traditions that no matter where you are, I call them portable traditions, that you have that. And maybe you even make a tradition for when you move. What's the thing that our family does? Maybe we have pizza our last night there, but something that honors the moment, that honors your family, that gives cohesion, even while the rest of the world is not feeling cohesive. Maybe you have some stories from your life, Kyle.
Yeah, not if I want to start crying, but I think
I'm crying, so that's okay.
Yeah. One of the key ones that I think helped our family when we were moving, for Heather and I, was we were moving with our kids, was the idea of saying goodbye to places. And so we had discussions with our kids before we moved and said, all right, well, we couldn't go to every place, but what are the key places that are the most meaningful for each of you that we want to have a trip to? So
yeah, and I think that came out of you guys growing up had to leave kind of abruptly, or left and then didn't know you weren't going back, so not having some of that closure. And so those things that you struggled with, then you had that insight already, that personal experience, to be able to say, we have the time, let's help our girls say goodbye to different places, or experience them again that last time. And they still talk about some of those last trips. The last time we went to the game park, the last time we went to the Drakensberg camping. I think that was incredibly helpful with each of our countries. And even now, as each girl graduates and moves back, goes back to the States for university, we've tried to be like, okay, what do you want to do here in Portugal, that senior year before you go? That's kind of been ingrained in us. But I love what you had mentioned. I hadn't heard it before, thinking through and even talking together as a family of what have we lost. I wish we would have done that, because I think that would have helped us a lot faster put the grief on the table, and allow us to see collectively as a family. We've all felt loss, some different things. Each of us felt lost very differently, or had attachments to different things that maybe we didn't realize as a family. I think that would have been helpful.
don't know if you want to mention like what we've done with Christmases now for traditions or not.
I'm just trying to think of what you're specifically
when we're in
thinking
the
of.
States, even having our own traditions. So
Mhm.
we've had to adjust that now that our
Mhm.
kids are out of the
Yeah.
home, but
Absolutely.
we don't have a home in America for us to do our own Christmases. So
Mhm.
now what we'll do is in between, if we are back in the States at Christmas time, in between my parents and Heather's parents, we'll usually rent an Airbnb for one night.
Absolutely.
Have the strangest Christmas. I mean, it's like takeout with maybe we string up a Christmas tree made out of lights on a wall, or something.
But it's
But
yours.
It's ours,
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
It's
And
yours.
our kids keep talking about that. And so
Yeah.
that's going to happen again this furlough. But it was those little things that, like you just said, that our family claims, and we can do that anywhere in the world, even if we were having to travel in some hotel somewhere. It was beneficial. I read John Piper's
You
wife.
all love Pipers.
She wrote a book on like Christmas family traditions or something, and that really, before I left for the field, that really got me thinking, like, what are traditions that we can do as a family that can keep going with us, whether it's how
Hmm.
we do a birthday or how we do Christmas or something. That was just really helpful, to be thinking that way even before we left for the field.
Yeah.
No, I
And
think that's critical. And I'll say one other thing about this. You're
yeah.
making a choice. A lot of families, MKs, can wind up feeling like victims, even like, may I say, God's victims, because the choices were taken away. But
Mm,
even in the non choices, you didn't have a choice to have a home when you were in the States because you don't have one. But you made a choice to do something that still honored that. And I think a lot of times we don't make the choices that we could make to nourish and to make it fun,
mm, yeah.
because
Yeah.
then it becomes fun, it becomes something special, um, so forth. So good job.
Mm,
God allowed me to go back to PNG so we left when I was 14. And I went back when I was 16 for a missions trip. And that was a very, yeah, like you said, is a journey of clarification. But it was a time for me to be able to say goodbye too. And I hadn't planned it that
Oh,
way, but God
mm.
really used it that way. And it was very beneficial and helpful for me to be able to do that.
but one of the things is you go back and it's not the same,
Exactly.
and that's part of realizing I can't go back. But for people who grew up, my husband grew up, his parents were missionaries, but they were in China, and so they didn't get to stay very long. So he grew up in Illinois, and you can go back to his house and still see it. You
Mm,
can do that sort of through the years, like, oh, this is where I grew up. But when you can't do that easily,
mm,
you can sort of have a idealization of your childhood. So when I went back to Nigeria, and it'd become much more, there were soldiers in the airport, and I thought, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to have the man with the horn welcoming us. And I just thought, this isn't quite the same. So that's part of the clarification too.
To maybe head off in a little bit different direction. So TCKs often struggle to answer that question, where are you from? How can parents help their children develop like a sense of identity and belonging when home keeps changing, or maybe home their answer for home isn't going to be what's expected?
Well, that is the toughest question many of us are asked. By now, I would say I have home in many places. I can feel at home in different ways, in depending where I am. If I get off the plane and I'm whatever in Nigeria, that's fine, or Liberia. But when I drive down the expressway and I see Indianapolis now, I think, that's home. But I think for parents, the biggest thing is that many say home is where my parents are. One of the tragedies is when I meet MKs who are frankly from very dysfunctional homes. And I
Mm,
want to say that some missionary families can be dysfunctional just like anybody else in the world.
mhm,
And so for whatever reason, that home is not a safe place, or it's not a place of happy memories, or they're feeling that the parent was always too busy. And there's always this conflict with my children's needs and God's call. but they are not antithetical. And God gave us our kids as a gift to be cared for. He also gave us our ministries as, what he wants us to do. But I think that caring for your children, spending that extra time, maybe an afternoon a week that you take time with your kids, and you go see the place where you're living, you move out or whatever it is. So that's the first thing you want your family to know. They're rooted in the family, that no matter what happens in the world, you can come back here. It's also a reason, I think, to try and keep relationships to our extended family. My daughter asked me once, she said, we were in Liberia, and she said, where are we from, Mom? Now, I didn't know any about the topic yet. I mean, I just had lived it, but I didn't know there were words. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, like Kathy's from Oklahoma. Somebody else is from there. Where are we from? Well, my husband was an intern, and so we'd been in St. Louis. Sherry was born in Liberia, but then we went back to St. Louis, and we were in the Navy, and we were in Portsmouth, and then we've been, all over the place. And I thought, well, I don't even know myself at this point. But that was why we decided we would spend our furloughs back by the extended family. Because by now we were kind of connected to a church in Virginia and all that kind of stuff. We thought, no, that's the one thing. They've got to know their family. So that when we went back, we anchored in that place so that they could be at the family birthdays and all that. So that seemed to be important. But then I think we can affirm that it can be more than one, and you can feel more than one, and you can be all of the above in a way. So I think for a lot of kids in the same family, they if they got 4 kids, they got 4 different places they feel they're from, depending where they grew up and what years they were there. And it's okay. Don't have a panic attack. They still love you, even if they don't think they're from where you are. You can enjoy your place and let them enjoy theirs, and it's okay.
Yeah. Any advice to an MK as to how to answer that question? Like when they're back on furlough or visiting churches?
Yes, they need to have the answer figured out before they ask the question. I think that's probably also good advice to parents, is help your kid figure out how they want to answer that. Because, of course, so many say, it depends. You want the long or short answer. But I think what I learned, some kids just say wherever my grandma's from. Some, say whatever. But after I moved to Indianapolis and I went to a conference someplace and they said, where are you from? I thought, I had learned to say either Chicago or I never said Nigeria, actually, after I got back. And they said, where are you from? And I said, Nigeria. And they'd say, well, you don't look like it. And then, well, you play with the apes and the monkeys. So I learned real quickly to say I was from Chicago, even if I wasn't. But when this got asked me, I thought, oh, where am I from now? I thought I'm, 40 something, 50, whatever I was. So I have learned to say I live in Indianapolis. And if people are tuned, they'll ask me, but usually people don't know I didn't answer their question. Now, if you answered my question that way, I'd say, well, where did you live before? But so figure out a question, an answer that is truthful, but if they don't want to tell their whole life story, it's okay. But if they want to tell their whole life story, they can say, some kids just say, well, I grew up in XYZ and so forth. I think it's becoming much more common for people to grow up where they're not living now. It seems to be, well, where am I from? I grew up in Silver, but, my American home or something. And a lot of times it just goes past that.
Yeah.
But you should figure out your answer. I mean, you should figure out what you want to answer so that you don't have to fumble every time.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think our oldest, I've heard her say, because she's living with her husband in Minneapolis, she's like, oh, well, I live in Minneapolis, but I grew up overseas. And then just kind of leaves it at that, unless people ask then, where? Because it's complicated. There's 3 different countries and all that sort of stuff. So kind of giving people a little tag and seeing if they grab onto it or not.
Yep. No, I think that's the kind of answer we're talking about. That's something that she's comfortable with and it's honest. And if people, like you say, want to know, they can ask. And if not, you realize, well, end of that conversation.
That was a polite question.
So true. So true.
So kind of on that same lines there about, the moving a lot, is that some of the ramifications of that later on is that sometimes kids have more of a migratory instinct and the sense of that restlessness, always wanting to move. How can families recognize when this may be affecting their child and what they can do to help them find some of that contentment and stability, especially as they get ready to launch life on their
Right.
own after they graduate?
That's an important question because a lot of kids wind up moving just to move because they feel like I need to move.
Mm.
There's some statistics about how many colleges, different TCKs go to because they're so used to moving. I think there's a couple of things. We had an MK stay with us for about 3 years who was in the process of trying to figure out life and things like that. And she came back one day and she said, "Well, I think I should move." And I said, "Why?" And, well, and it was that feeling. You could tell. I mean, there wasn't like a good reason. Sometimes there's a good reason to move, but she just had that feeling. So then she came back a couple days later. She said, "I realized something. I like my job. My grandparents live near here. I'm actually quite content here. I could give myself permission to stay."
Hmm.
And she had never assumed that before. So she stayed because she needed to get her master's in public health. I mean, she, for what she wanted to do, it was important to stay. And when she got all that, then she went to Uganda. And then she got married and went to Cambodia. But, by then she wasn't running. She had accomplished some things. I don't know about you guys, but when I got to Liberia, I almost had a panic attack because after 2 weeks, I thought, I don't know when I'm going to leave. I'm going to have to work through whatever problems come up here because I can't just leave. And before, there's always an end point. So you can wait out a problem. So I think even as life is going on, as you can help your kids to deal with issues that come up, that can help them for later. But, the point is if a kid wants to leave, asking them maybe, so what are the pros and cons? And is it okay if you stay? Because we almost start to glory in leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if glory in it, but life is always going to be a little better.
Yeah, or make that part of your identity of how often you
Yeah.
move and stuff.
Yeah, I'm tough. I can move. Piece of cake.
Yeah. Where we're living now, this is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. We've been here 7 years, so.
Wow. Are you getting restless?
No, it's nice to not have to move, actually.
Okay.
So getting used to it. One thing that was really helpful as you were talking about that, that came to mind was that we did find it helpful when we were before furloughs or finishing up furloughs to always set in advance when the next one was going to be, if at all possible, so that our kids and family knew, okay, hey, when are you gonna when you're saying goodbye, you knew when the next time you were planning to see them was, whether it be a visit for them or something like that. So we've already talked through that. So each goodbye was, hey, it wasn't just a open-ended goodbye. It was, hey, goodbye, looking forward to seeing you again in a year, or looking forward to seeing you again in 2 years, or when it is. But there was some end point to that, because otherwise it's just open-ended, and it just makes the goodbyes, they're still hard, but it's easier.
That's great advice. And certainly in today's world with the internet, even to plan when you're going to say hello again. I mean, that's a huge change from when, of course, I was young. And I will say the other thing is there are TCKs who are absolutely never going to move. My sister, who was the one born in Portugal, came back and she lives 55 years now in the same house.
Wow.
She used to sit and just draw her house when she was a kid. I would be out playing soccer with the friends. She would sit there, and for some reason, that was what she did. She thought about one day, and she's lived it. It's, solid. Now, of course, her daughter was in the foreign service and things like that, but
Right. But she stayed put.
Yeah, so people have different ways of dealing with it. But for some of us, life on the move has kind of been interesting.
Yeah, and you kind of noticed that when his parents left the field, they stayed with the mission board, but lived at the Bible Institute for the mission board. So they had a lot of these returning MKs, and just kind of that restlessness where they made it through the 2 years of Bible school and then were here for 6 months and here for a year and just couldn't rest, couldn't find stability or be grounded. It was just that constant on the move, maybe trying to find fulfillment somewhere. I'm not really sure, but there was just so much unsettledness.
Yeah, I mean, I started moving when I was 5, and if you just every year or two we would be going somewhere.
For training or
Yeah,
something.
for something.
Yeah.
And so you just get so used to that rhythm that it just, I don't know, it becomes natural to do that. So
I will say one of the dangers in this much moving is that we cut off relationships. We involve ourselves in them, but then once they're gone, you just make a big cut. And that can really affect marriages, and it can affect long term all sorts of things. Is that, when I got married, I could set up an argument about the garbage real quickly. Who's going to take it out? And I mean, it was like a nothing, but it was almost like fear of getting completely close because something's going to happen. He's going to die. He's going to, something will happen. So you don't want to put all your eggs in a basket because that's going to, it's likely to end. Now we've been married 58 years now. So now it's really, then you think whatever. But I think that is another big thing that we do internally. We set up some walls sometimes, even in close relationships, because of the fear of loss, or we just don't know how to expect. And I have to thank my high school friends from church who have insisted that we stay friends for 50, 60 years. And they expect me to come back to the reunions. And that's new for me, but they all kind of lived in the same part of Chicago. So they're there and they just keep telling me to come back. And I think, okay.
That's great. I think that's maybe a piece of advice to friends of MKs is like, keep drawing them in, keep going after them. That could be really helpful. We have some friends in the States that put a lot of effort into keeping the relationship strong, while we're over here, and that's so appreciated.
And then I'll just say one thing, the other side is that the MKs that grow up together in their schools have a bonding, and will go to great lengths to be at the wedding, great lengths, So there is the other side where that group is tight. It's just that you're not with them. It's not like they're in your same city. But boy, it's amazing how far some MKs will go to be at a wedding or some reunion or something, because there is that memory that nobody else in their life shares. And
Yep. Yeah, that's so true. You had kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. You used the phrase delayed adolescence. And in the book, it talks about TCKs sometimes tending to mature unevenly, appearing very, adult in some areas, but then younger in other areas. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, I would say, you can travel the world at 14, 15, 16, and it's not a fear, right? I mean, you know what you're doing. But you get there and you have no idea how the bus works to take you someplace or how to do something that's social. So you're terribly advanced here, and then you get there and you don't even know how to be social with your peers because you don't know the things they're doing. Now that probably has changed some with internet and stuff, but I think we can, because our kids can seem, we spend a lot of time with adults in most of our expat type lifestyle, mission lifestyle. So kids can also be very comfortable with adults. And then the parent wonders why they don't know how to have relationships with peers, or the kid thinks they get, back wherever they're going and that these kids are so juvenile or something, And so the very kids should have relationships with, other kids. And so then kids wind up sometimes socially isolating or feeling, what's the matter with me or something. But I think the parents can expect more sometimes. When I was at somebody's house and they were talking about some grand political things going on in the world because they were from that country and they were connected. Their 10-year-olds sat there and listened to the whole thing. And I thought, no, most 10-year-olds that I know in Indianapolis would not be sitting here listening to this discussion. But the kid was. And so they were way advanced in terms of awareness and, all that. But at the same time, do they know about how life works back wherever they're from? And just when you think they're so grown up, they ask a question that anybody else who grew up in that culture would know. And so then they seem like, what's your problem? How can you be so ignorant? I remember we were coming back from Liberia, and we got to Morocco for the airport, and I started up the escalator. My kids didn't know how to do it. I thought, just get up. I thought, oh, they haven't had an escalator for 2 years. They have no idea how this thing works. So we practiced escalators in the airport so that when we got to the States, they wouldn't look stupid.
So true.
So it's that kind of thing that, it's just the way, at least it seems. So,
yeah. There was a helpful just phrase that was good for me to be able to think through that and be more intentional, was just do life with your kids. And so as we're trying to prepare them for going back to the States, even down to like, hey, we're buying a new car, and I'm not going to be there when you're maybe buying your first car. So we're going to, even though you're 12 and 13, we're going to just sit down and we're going to talk about what it means to buy a car and what things you look for, and planning different things or navigating or whatever it is, but just trying to let them, because you don't always have the opportunities to let them do kid things, or to do the things that other people are doing back in the States. So you have to be really intentional of trying to fit those things in. And that was really helpful for us when we're working with our kids, to getting them ready for that. One of the things you'd mentioned there just a couple of minutes ago about the difficulty sometimes forming relationships, those deeper relationships. Do you have any tips for parents of how they can help encourage their kids to form those deeper, lasting friendships, or ways that they can help foster that, to make sure that happens well?
Ironically, sometimes I feel like our whole emphasis on MK, can make kids feel so different that they forget they're a human being first. And that's where the personhood comes in, that person talked about. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? How do we teach our kids? The reason goodbyes hurt is because you're a relational being. And when we say goodbye, God made us to be relational. When relationships are broken, that's why the first judgment on sin was breaking relationship, called death. So do you realize that every single person in this world wants a relationship, not just you? Do you realize that everybody in this world has emotions, and the needs we have? And I think as we help our kids understand their own humanity, what is that basic self that God made you to be? He made you in his likeness, like other people. He also made you totally unique. And in that uniqueness, how do you, as parents, foster those gifts? But when you come to relationships, if you understand your own story, like grief is grief. If someone else just lost somebody, or even if they didn't do it my way, if I understand they're still a human being, I have scads of relationships that have nothing to do with TCK, because they're human beings, and I'm sure you do too. So if they lose a kid, they're going to cry. If they are hungry, they're going to notice it. And I think taking our story, and Lord, how do we use that story to see other people? They don't have to be TCKs, they don't have to be MKs, but if I understand my story and who I am, I can look at their story and assume that it matters. The reason I feel like I can do what I've done in my life is I can have 40, 50, 60 nationalities or whatever in front of me. But if they're doing transition, whether it's a life transition or a mobile transition, they're going to feel it. So you can talk about the topic because that human heart will connect with you. So I think helping our kids not to feel, we want them to understand that they are human beings like everybody else, and that they need relationships. And so I don't know if I'm making sense, but how do we foster it? Well, you can invite people over, but helping them understand You need relationships. Also, that culture is a dynamic in how we make relationships. That's another thing. So when you go back, how you were with your MK friends, where you just were casual or, talked about everything, maybe it'll take people a little longer,
Mm.
where some people, when they're not in that environment, they'll seem unfriendly, but that's another thing. The other thing is ask them about themselves.
Hmm.
We get so annoyed that people don't care about my story. What do you care about their story? Somebody else might not have ever asked them about their story. And when they tell you their story, everybody has a story. When they tell you their story, listen for what they're saying, not just the details. But again, if they said, "Well, my dad died when I was 5," well, guess what? That's probably a significant thing to ask about. So, how did that
Mm.
impact you? We can do that.
That's very true because I think so many times MKs come back, whether it's on furlough or transitioning to university, and they feel, maybe like the oddball out or something, or trying to fit in. And one of the things that was said at the kind of like MK international orientation at Cedarville University that our kids went through and attended was that they were joining a freshman class of other freshmen that now for the first time have probably left their home, they're coming to university, they don't know exactly what's going on. And that same idea of just ask the person across the hall about their story. Ask them what their high school was like. Ask them what they are feeling about being, at university, instead of expecting everyone to first ask the MK. Or if we don't reciprocate that interest in other people's stories, we can't really be upset if people aren't interested in our stories. And I thought that was a really unique perspective. At first, it kind of came out feeling like, oh, that's kind of harsh. But it was like, no, I think that's exactly what they needed to hear. That a lot of times we maybe don't lean into other people's stories as much because we've got such a grand story, we think.
hmm Well, and also it's probably a way to protect ourselves when we're feeling out. You kind of
Mm.
rationalize yourself. But I do want to say what I think is key. When these books have come out, so many people came up to me and said, I relate to everything you're saying, but I didn't do it your way. Why? And the amount of people that are culturally complex in our world today and are struggling with identity is huge,
Mm.
whether their parents are from two different, nationalities, or they're minority kids going to school in a different um, culture because, they go home and they speak a different language. We have a lot of refugee kids in
Mhm.
Indianapolis, and their parents don't even speak English. There is this world of people who are lost in terms of their identity because nobody's doing it the way it's been done through all the centuries. The cultural confusion. And then the complexity, it's not just like I'm a TCK, but I'm a TCK with parents who are, from two countries. I'm a TCK with, I'm multiracial or whatever it is. We have this opportunity to understand. How
Mhm.
many, the refugees, do you understand their displacement? Do you understand? And I think that, to me, God has given us this incredible topic to use. And that's why it's important for MKs, TCKs to understand their story, because it doesn't just end with you being so special. It ends with, this is a story God gave you. You're his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for his purposes. He gave you this story with all its ups and downs to shape you
Mm.
for his purposes. What are those purposes? And for the parents, when we're having panic attack, God is shaping your child. The best thing you can do is love them well and be that example, because, I mean, somebody who's faithful, living faithfully, and, with your own commitment, not ignoring the kids, but, that we are, like you said, this is a greater story than we're in. But this was not a mistake for your children if
Mm.
you believe that they're God's workmanship. And
Mm.
all of us have a story, and your guys are using your story. I believe I'm using my story. I had homeschooling, I had boarding school, I had public school, I had raising my kids, you know what I mean? It's like all of it without ever knowing there would be a purpose for it. It seemed like it was sort of a disparate life. Like, whatever happened, how do I get my pieces together? But they're all his pieces. And that to me is the wonder, because I always thought God would ask me to do what I hated to do. So I never wanted to tell him what I'd like to do, because then he wouldn't let me. I mean, that was part of my listening to all the testimonies. I told God I'd go any place but Africa, and look where I am, ha ha ha. So you don't want to tell him. But the wonderful thing is he made us exactly right for what he wants us to do. And it's all part of that shaping. So we want our kids to understand themselves. We want them to grow. We want them to find themselves as God made them to be, with those gifts. And part of the gift is that he didn't give me the other gifts. That was a great freedom for me when I realized I'm not an administrator. I'm not going to be doing all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to be an artist ever, but I can be what he made me to be.
Yeah.
So
with all the experiences.
He shapes us by those.
Yeah.
And that's why, helping your kids to learn, like you said, how do we say goodbye? How do we tie this to more? That's also part of learning to live with life here, that we can live. Well, as my dad said, unpack your bag and plant your trees wherever you are, because otherwise you'll never live. How do we do that? So that we live fully in the places that God gave us to live, and the experiences.
Yeah, no, exactly.
We kind of have the phrase, be fully present wherever you're at.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Try to be fully engaged with friends or family wherever we're at, and it bounces back and forth, but that helps us to feel a bit more rooted that way.
Yeah.
One of the things, so I've been working as we're getting ready to go back on furlough, my daughter and I also often listen to like audiobooks when we're on our way to her Krav Maga classes. And so the book that she chose this time was 92 Ways to Talk to Anyone, because we're getting ready to go back on furlough and needing to be able to, start all these new friendships and meet new people. And you're just forced to do that on, talk to people in churches. But one of the things you highlighted in the book is that TCKs often grow up into be leaders, teachers, bridge builders across cultures. And we're seeing a little bit of that with just some of the experiences that our kids are put into. What are some of the things that you've noticed that MKs are, the experiences that they're put into that prepare them for those things, and how can they be best utilizing those?
Well, obviously we have our personalities that God's given us, but I think what helps develop this, and that you as parents can help, is often they've had opportunities to do things that other kids might not get to do. Like, I used to go watch surgeries at the hospital and bandage up people's legs and things like that, because I was going to be something wonderful. But anyway, you get to do life. But I think also there's a creativity, because a lot of times you've had to figure something out that somebody else could maybe just go by, and things like that. But I do believe also the big thing is seeing both sides. And my dad was asked to adjudicate between, our mission was going to go under the local church. And so there was a lot of negotiation. So they asked him to be the negotiator. And he said, my problem is I can always see both sides, and both sides want me to see just their side. And I thought, again, I didn't have words for it, but that was the bridge building, that he could take this and see it. And I think a lot of TCKs, I know, they work in cross-cultural situations. They work in things effectively because they see how it can be. And teachers, often have they can offer something personally about the situation because they've been in it. So it's not that we have automatic whatever, but I think even as a Bible study teacher before, or some things I do now, I think I have a different understanding sometimes of when they're the stories in Scripture, because they used to tell us in Sunday school that Abraham made a big mistake because he took Lot with him, because he was just supposed to take his family. And I read that as an adult, and I thought, but Lot was his nephew and his brothers had died. So I'm sure he was considered to be Abraham's son. I'm not sure he was being disobedient as much as in that culture that Lot had become his son. So I don't know. There's just different things sometimes that I think about that people are surprised because they never thought about it, because I think about it through a different lens.
No, that's good.
Yeah, with all the different experiences that kids have and learning different cultures, you would see things through different lenses. And I think that sometimes we've seen when our kids are confused in America, it's because they are seeing multiple sides to one story, or they can see the other person's point of view, or, politically, they see why a country responded a different way just because they've had different cultural experiences, and lived with people with very different cultural worldviews. So our oldest daughter was considering foreign services for a while just because of being able to navigate cross-culturally so well, and seeing how sometimes that doesn't happen and how that causes so many problems. So yeah, we've definitely seen the benefits of kids that get to experience different worldviews. So to just wrap it up with one last question, if you could tell missionary parents one thing to remember during their busiest, hardest season of overseas life, what would it be?
Hang on. We had a horrible first year. And I often seen people go out, that it seems like that's where the enemy tries to knock you out. And that was when my uncle was killed, and 6 people died who were close to us. We got robbed 10 times. And it's like, is this just, were we crazy?
Mm.
Were we crazy? And I heard a tape then. Somebody said, those who sow in tears will doubtless come again with rejoicing. And he said it takes probably 5 years to get going. But I thought, well, I'm counting my years. But as I would cry, I think, you promised there will be rejoicing. I don't see it right now. It feels like we're barely surviving. And then my father was the last one who died. So we cut our first term short to go back. And, I thought on the way home, I thought, I didn't even get started. I was supposed to be a
Mm.
nurse, and they didn't even want my nursing because they had uh, nationalized nursing. So here I've spent my life getting ready. They tell me they don't need me. It's like, so we're supposed to go home to our churches and tell them what we did. I didn't do anything. I barely survived. And it was like God said, actually, it doesn't matter what you did. Just tell them what I taught you. And that's much more important than what you did. And I
Mm.
think that was when I learned to die, that it said if the seed doesn't die, that I went back as an MK with all kinds of good plans.
Mm.
I was going to be great. I couldn't be great at anything else, but I could be a great missionary because I knew how to do that. Turned out I didn't. And so there was a relinquishment. But I also, George Verwer said when we came back to the States, and again, you keep going, I heard him say, you have to relearn your faith from scratch at every stage of life. And I think sometimes we start to trust what we know about him and what we think we've learned. And he said, but you can't live in the past. You have to live in today. And I'm still here. And I'm still saying, fear not. I'm still saying I'm going to complete the work I started. I'm still saying I'm God. And that's the only place I can go at those times, is right back to zero and say, I'm here. I gave you my life. It's not exactly going the way I was expecting. But I didn't know. I didn't even know there was a topic for what I've done in my last 40 years.
Mm.
But I see how God prepared me because I didn't do nursing. I wound up doing Bible study with international women and getting who were ambassadors' wives and all these things. And I kept saying, God, I came to Liberia like for the Liberians. I'm good with Africans. I know how to do this. And these other people have been always kind of scary. They're kind of rich, and I'm the poor MK when I was a kid. But he was teaching me, and I didn't know it. So all I can say is keep walking. And when I came back to the States, and we had this great Bible study then by the end, and I had to leave again. And I was getting letters from all my friends and I wasn't opening them. I could hardly stand it. And I said, why don't I ever get to stay? And he said, are you willing to be a stranger and a pilgrim? So I spent my life traveling the world, rooted here in Indianapolis, but still getting to my rootlessness, and trying to live each time fully there and realizing I'm not going to keep all these friends, but I need to engage and trust whatever God wants to do. And we are strangers and pilgrims, but it's a good journey.
Thank you for that.
We appreciate you taking the time today to share from your heart and share from what you've learned and what others have shared with you. And I just really pray that this will be a blessing and an encouragement to the missionaries that hear this as well.
Thanks. I'll think later of everything I didn't say or didn't do perfectly, but may God take it, because I hope it's His work in us and through us, and His plan for us. And I want to say to all of those who are out there doing it, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
He has promised to lead you. He gave you your kids. You know them better than others, and enjoy them and all the experiences you get to do with them. Because I'm sure your kids also remember the fun times and the things that, are special. So thank you for what you're doing and encouraging
It's our
others.
pleasure.
So
Our pleasure. And we do encourage everyone just to check out your book there, the Third Culture Kids book. That's just a great resource we have our missionaries that are coming over that have kids read that in advance as just a really good foundational mindset and understanding for people before they come. So we really appreciate the work you did on that, and
Thank
pray
you.
that it continues to be a blessing to people.
I appreciate that. We're trying to get a 4th edition out that'll be a little bit of a stretch in the how do we take what we've learned and use it and
Oh, that'll be fascinating.
keep it for
Looking forward to
ourselves.
that.
We'll see. Anyway, good to be with
Good
you guys.
project. Well, that's all for this show, and we want to thank you again for spending your valuable time with us today.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider taking just a moment and giving us a great review. Your review will help people find the podcast and allow these resources to encourage more people. If you took something valuable away from this episode, please share it with someone who would enjoy it.
If you'd like to find the show notes, blog posts, and free resources for ministry and leadership, as well as some information on my book, Overflowing, visit kylefarran.com. That's KYLEFARRAN.com. Hope to see you soon on a future podcast.